Communicating and communicating effectively are two different things. It's basically the bridge between being chosen or not. And in short, it's getting more yeses than nos. And in order to get more yeses rather than nos, we are joined by a professional. We are joined by a master's qualified communications professional, Nadia Bourboulas. And I'm so excited for her to share insights, experiences, and tips and tricks along the way. We got introduced through a mutual connection. And when we had a chat, I was just blown away. Her personal brand, her communication, her presence is just beyond this world. And I can't be more excited to have her join and get her exposed to the world. Nadia, thank you so much for being here.
Wow, wow, wow. Petra, thank you for your most warm introduction. And let me say, the feeling was completely mutual when I met you.
Thank you. Now, we, to get straight into the topic, we want to talk about communication. And so many people, I would say the majority of people, would avoid public speaking at any cost. They don't want to speak in meetings. They definitely don't want to speak on stages. And yet you have made it your profession. You've actually studied communication. Why? How did you get into this field? And what did you do with those insights that you learned?
Thank you, Petra. Look, I would agree with you. Public speaking has been rated as frightening as the thought of dying or buying a home. It is something that we don't necessarily do all the time, but it's something that we're asked to do. It's something that's called upon us in our everyday lives if we are professionals. And we're not necessarily taught how to do it. But when I was about 8 years of age in grade two here in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, my parents read an advertisement in the yellow pages that there was a local lady teaching one how to talk. And they were thrilled by the idea and they signed me up for lessons. And they shared it with me that morning, and the lesson was that afternoon. And I had never heard of such a thing. I wondered why I was doing this. I didn't know anyone else who was enrolled in such a class, but I trusted my parents who I knew wanted the best for me. Well, I went along to my first lesson and I fell in love with my teacher, Mrs. Vicky Fuller. And so began a 15-year relationship where I went to Mrs. Fuller's home every day, pardon me, once a week for the school year, every year for 15 years. And I completed exams, Stedfords, concerts, performances, and she then led me to finish my associate diploma in speech and drama teaching through the Trinity College of London, which is a global syllabus. And she guided me through that process, through all of our lessons, where we learnt about the theory and practice of speech, improvisation, characterization, accent modification, monologues, storytelling, movement, mime. And as a result, I developed confidence in speaking at primary school, at high school, during my university years, and then into the workplace. So I really have my parents to thank for starting me on this journey.
What a story. I love it. I haven't heard
Thank
it
you.
before. And,
Uh,
it goes to show
yes,
that one person can have such a massive impact on the trajectory of your life. Because if you have not been
absolutely.
exposed to this opportunity, who knows what would have happened?
I agree, Petra. I agree.
Now, clearly, early on, you have been exposed to what good communication looks like, what to avoid, and there's a lot more what you just listed in terms of rhymes and tonality and memes and so forth. What or how would you consider an effective communicator? Like, what are the traits and the personality of somebody who communicates effectively versus somebody who simply speaks?
Look, that's an excellent question, Petra. One of the best things you can do for yourself as a speaker is get to know yourself and feel comfortable with yourself. Be proud of who you are and believe yourself to be enough. One of the continuing issues I see with professional people, be they male or female, be they officers or CEOs, is that they do not back themselves. They do not believe that they are the most suitable candidate for the job. They wonder why they were chosen to get that promotion. They wonder why they were asked to be the keynote speaker at that conference. They think that someone else would be more suitable to be the facilitator of that session. So, what differentiates a good speaker from a great speaker is someone who has confidence in themselves. And the only way to gain that confidence is through the passage of time and through spending time with yourself, getting to know yourself. What you then need to do is practice. And you might have heard the saying, Petra, and I'm sure your guests have heard it, preparation prevents poor performance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important if you've been asked to chair a meeting and it's the first time you're chairing this meeting, or you're new to the business, or you're new to this role, that you prepare, that you allocate time in your diary on at least 3 separate occasions, I would deem, to prepare. So, for example, the meeting might be on Friday morning. So, the Friday prior, at least, I would allocate 15 minutes to draft a rough agenda. 15 minutes. It's easy enough to find 15 minutes. Then on the Monday, I would review that. I would allocate 5 minutes. Then on the Wednesday, I would really fill that agenda with the content you want to cover. If you could spare the time on the Thursday, I would actually do a formal run through, and I would even have a peer review me, so that by the time Friday comes around, you've had about 4 or 5 sessions with yourself preparing for this meeting. One of the worst things you can do as a professional is arrive at a meeting and start with, look, I haven't had the chance to prepare for this meeting. You really are stabbing yourself in the foot, because what you're saying to your audience, to your colleagues, to your peers, to your associates, is that I haven't bothered to make this meeting, that is you, the people in this room, a priority. So it's not very likely that your meeting will go so well. So, in response to your question, Petra, what differentiates a good from a great speaker? 2 things I would say. The speaker must be sure of themselves, and 2, they must practice.
I love those very practical tips. And for anyone um, who has done some other task, they should come back and re-listen to exactly that passage. Because what you're saying is basically you need to prepare, you need to go through the event, whatever you're preparing for, a few times, because
Yes,
when the event actually happens, you know you can focus on the people in the meeting. You can pick up on emotions and you don't have to focus on the content as such. And that also gives you a
precisely.
lot more confidence, because in the end, I always say people buy into your competence, but they buy more so into your confidence. And when you're
Oh,
so figured and so worried about what am I saying next and what do we need to cover and have we discussed it already, that looks frazzled straight away.
precisely, Petra. I agree with you. And I really like that phrase about competence and confidence. And you're showing a great deal of respect to your audience when you do come prepared, when you are confident, when you've spent time preparing the content, that you are proving to your audience at being you are a competent person, and that will be aspiring to your audience members, so they are more inclined to listen.
Mm-hmm. And we just before we started recording, we quickly
Yes.
talked about your preparation, because you came with your notes. You've got the answers ready,
Thank
because you said
you.
we only have that much time. We don't want to get sidetracked. And this shows such a level of respect. And when we talk about personal branding, which is a big part also of communicating to an
Yes.
audience effectively, these small things, this is exactly what builds your personal brand and the experience others have with you. Because now in my mind, I say, Nadia is like a professional, even though
Thank you.
a podcast is not necessarily a professional setting, but you treat it like it is the most important event. And I think we need to go into every meeting like this, with this mindset. I need to make it the most important, the most impactful presence and presentation that I can do, because as you said before, you're priming
Yes.
your mindset in that direction.
Absolutely, Petra. And I think it's very much about preparing the mind and having that really positive and professional outlook, because, Petra, you're a professional and you have invited me as a professional to speak. So I have to properly prepare for that if I want to be taken as a professional, if I want to build that level of credibility, it's essential that I come prepared, because if I don't, quite quickly that can come undone and you won't invite me back, or you won't continue the business relationship. So it's really important to treat others as you would like to be treated as a professional. And I know how well prepared you come to all of your meetings, having had quite a number with you. And it's out of respect to you and your guests that I came prepared today.
Oh, thank you. I love it.
The pleasure's all mine.
Now, let's address the elephant in the room with some pitfalls. When
Yes.
does communication fall flat? Because we may have prepared, we know exactly what we're talking about, but then in the end, it still goes blah, blah. What happened there?
Yes, and look, it does happen to all of us, Petra, no matter how prepared we are. Sometimes there are some unforeseen circumstances that take place, and we do have to change course. But with that, I have noticed a lot of pitfalls that do tend to arise that can be avoided, and I would like to address them. The first is when a speaker has an unclear structure. So they arrive at a meeting, or they've been asked to deliver a speech at a conference, and they don't inform the participants what they're going to be talking about. They just start talking. And no doubt you've been to meetings or you've been to conferences where people just start talking. And one thing we have to bear in mind is that perhaps someone ducked into the room a little bit later. Perhaps there's a new starter. Perhaps this is the first time someone in this industry has attended an industry event. It's really important to turn to the person who introduced you, the MC or the person before you, to say, thank you, John. As John mentioned, my name is Nadia, and I represent, insert business name, and I'm here to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Then provide a brief summary. For the next 10 minutes, I will be discussing this, that, and this. I'm going to be providing 3 examples, and I will be allocating 5 minutes at the end for your questions. With that, let's get started. So you're providing some sort of framework within which you'll speak. If someone just starts speaking at you, you might have missed who they are, who they represent, what they're talking about, why they're talking about it, and what, in fact, the outcome of their presentation is. Because everyone in an audience wants to know, why should I be listening to this person in the first place? So as a speaker, you have a responsibility to inform your audience why it is your audience should be listening to you in the first place, and what it is they'll be walking away from, or walking away with, rather, at the end. So it's really important, one, to have a clear structure. The second pitfall I find, Petra, is when people use verbal fillers. So a verbal filler is a sound, word, or phrase that doesn't actually mean anything in the context of what someone is saying. It simply fills in a space. So, for example, well, kind of like, sort of. And sometimes it's not until someone records you and plays you back that you realize, oh my goodness, I said like 3 times in that sentence. So one thing I recommend to my clients is to always have someone record you and play it back to you so you can pick up on any of these verbal fillers, because you're better off saying nothing. You're better off pausing and trying to eliminate them from your speech. The third thing I see a lot of, Petra, is people moving, people swaying, people fidgeting, um, sort of. Oh, there you are. I'm just using some verbal fillers there. Pardon me. I am human after all. Um, they can't stand still, for example, and it's very distracting. They really need to learn to stay still, to focus. And once they've mastered that, then they can move with intention. So again, if someone can film you when you're speaking, pick up on how fast are you moving? Are you moving too quickly? Do I gesture too much? Am I too still, for example? Just getting that comfortable balance. And fourth and finally, I would say that failure to analyze one's audience. It's a real pitfall of a speaker if you simply enter a room and start speaking. It is your key responsibility as a speaker to understand who it is you are talking to and why you are talking to them. If you don't do that, you are disrespecting your audience and they won't listen to you because what you have to say may not be relevant to them. So, a really good speaker shifts the focus from themselves to the audience. A great speaker is there to serve their audience. All of these pitfalls, Petra, the unclear structure, the verbal fillers, the constant moving, and the failure to analyze one's audience can be rectified through properly preparing for one's speech.
I love these tips because especially I think with the structure, you get people on the same page or not,
Yes,
or you
that's
lose them
right.
straight away. People's
That's
attention
right.
spans are so short, and when I see no point listening to them,
Yes,
I've got my phone out. I'm in meetings. I scroll through social media, and the whole
precisely.
purpose exactly is gone.
And you do see people getting up and leaving meetings if the structure hasn't been made clear to them because they
Mhm.
don't know how long this person is actually going to speak for and what it is they're going to speak about and if it's relevant to them. So they just leave and say, if I get the time, I might listen to the recording, and inevitably they won't.
And it's also creating certainty that everyone is
Yes,
concerned about, and we need to address those physical and physiological needs early on. Like in a presentation, in a meeting, it's same.
that's
This is what
right.
we're doing. It's all about also from the trusted authority concept. How can you be transparent with what you do, how you
Yes,
do it, when and for how long you do it?
I agree. If you want to be a trusted authority, trust that your audience want to know what's taking place in their lives over the next however many minutes.
Absolutely. And I think in a second you put your audience first and put yourself into the shoes of them. What are their concerns, their worries, their questions? You're ready, take less, you've got less pressure on you because it's not about you. It's about
Yes,
the message that you deliver and the impact that you can make. And I think the audience picks up on that very quickly. If it's all about, someone speaking about how great they are, or if it's
yes,
something that I could actually, as a listener, take away and learn from and make me feel good about being here.
precisely, Petra. And already when you're standing up in front of a group of people, there is quite a bit of pressure on you. There are however many sets of eyes on you. So you can offload some of that by saying exactly as you said, focus on the audience and their needs.
And that brings us into our next question, because in a second we are in front of people, we are nervous and anxious
Yes.
and sweaty. How do we go about dealing with this pressure? I mean, we've said already we can focus on our audience and put ourselves in their shoes. Is there
Yes.
any other technique or tips and tricks that you are using for your clients?
Yes. Do you know, Petra, there's basically two, and I know they both sound very cliched, but they're very effective. And I use them, and I use them as recently as a couple of weeks ago when I was speaking at the final staff meeting. The first is back yourself. Tell yourself that you are enough. You've been asked to speak for a particular reason, so you are entitled to that. Don't promote negative self-talk. Lucy should have done it, or someone else should have been asked, or I'm having an off day, or really I'm not the best person for this job. Cut that negative self-talk out immediately.
Mhm.
Instead, perhaps repeat a positive mantra. I am enough. I will do a really good job at this. I'm the best person to deliver this information at this time. I'm well prepared for my presentation. And you can just repeat those mantras to yourself quietly in the lead up to your presentation. I even did it while the person before me was presenting. I had the agenda. I knew that I was up next, and I just felt this tightness. And I thought, oh my gosh, everyone can see my heart pounding. I'm sweating. And it still happens to me. And then I just repeated those mantras. And the second thing I did, Petra, which takes 5 seconds, is I took 3 deep breaths. I inhaled, I held my breath, I exhaled, and I did that 3 times. And these two things, uh, repeating those positive mantras and breathing deeply rather, took all of 15 seconds. And then I just repeated that. I did that about 3 times. So 45 seconds, and I was good to go. So, look, I know that people respond to anxiety very differently. I've had clients break out in rashes. I've had clients really need a glass of alcohol. For example, I had a young man. He was a plumber, and he was asked to deliver a wedding speech. He hadn't given a wedding speech, since grade 12 English, which was 20 years prior. And he really needed a white wine. And, that seemed to work for him. So, I had to work with him. I wasn't going to rob that of him. But I also said, it would be impactful also to do some deep breathing and to repeat those positive mantras. So anxiety manifests itself in very many different ways for people, but I would encourage my clients to address it. Otherwise, you'll never get up and speak in public, and that won't serve you. There's no point in avoiding it. Try to address it. Start small with a small group of people, and then increase the size of your group, and you will get there, and you'll be really proud of yourself when you finish your presentation.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. It's those small things, and they're cliches for a reason because they work.
They do work. That's right. Thank you for your understanding. I thought, oh gosh, why did I bother asking that question? But they are effective. They do work. They've proven to. I've seen it with my own two eyes, and I practice it
Absolutely.
myself.
And you also mentioned at the beginning that it comes down to knowing yourself, having self-awareness of your style, of your preferences, of how you respond in certain situations. And you also work with clients on helping to develop their own style. How do you go about defining, is it better for you to have one hand in your pocket, for example, or is it better to walk and talk and use your arms or stand still? How do you go about, because everyone's got a different communication style, and there's not a one size fits all approach to say, always stand still, then make 3 steps, make the next
That's
step,
right. That's a really good question, Petra. And look, we are all different, and we all have different communication styles. Some people are introverted, some people are extroverted, some people are neurodiverse. They come from a different background. Some people speak with are particularly loud. Their volume is particularly loud. And I would encourage people to really lean in to who they are and to not pretend to be someone else or not try to emulate someone else, because it will fail. We are who we are, and we really need to tap into those natural strengths and talents. And that's what will make us a good speaker. Within reason, of course. I mean, I have worked with a gentleman who was particularly loud to the point where it was overbearing. So we had to work on lowering his volume. I have worked with some high school students, some female high school students who were particularly timid. So we had to work at building their confidence and working on their projection and their posture. So lean into yourself, but always be open for a little bit of improvement, if I may say, that will overall benefit you and your listeners.
Mm. And when you've got a confident and strong presence, the
Yes.
words usually flow.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was something else I wanted to comment on, that flow state. Once you do get into a rhythm, you do get into that flow state, and your audience can see and feel that. And, for those of you who practice yoga, you're just unstoppable when you get into that state. And it's a really nice zone to be in. And it takes practice to get there. But when you do, you really and your audience experience the benefits.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of flow song, everyone harps on the importance of storytelling, but especially the more technical experts, it's not easy to come up with this most compelling and fun and witty story as you go. They're very fact-based and figures and the
Yes.
data, and you think, oh, storytelling, nobody cares about the story. Where do you see storytelling fitting in, also in the normal kind of business environment, in meetings? How do we best leverage stories? Is it overrated? What's your take on this?
Yes. Look, that's a really good point, Petra. Facts and figures and data can be quite bland, can be quite boring, and not particularly memorable. If I asked you about your childhood and some really positive experiences, I'm sure you might be able to draw on some of those experiences when you're parents or your siblings or your grandparents read you books or told you stories. Even now at the dinner table, when you're with your family, they might recite a story from the day, or a story from the grandparents, or when they were growing up in the 50s, and those stories we remember because there's a clear beginning, middle, often climatic point, and end. So, as children, we love stories. As adults, we love stories. They're captivating. You're engrossed until the end. So, I would encourage business leaders and speakers to turn something boring and bland into a story by formulating a clear beginning, middle, climatic point, and end. And sometimes you can even mix those around. You can start the story with the end point, but at least you've got those four pillars there to work with. If you want your staff or your audience or your teams to remember something you said, think about turning it into a story and injecting it with some emotion.
Mm. And this is such a practical approach again, because we can all follow this structure. Have I got an
Yes.
intro? Do I
Yes.
create some context? Do people know what I'm talking about?
That's right.
Similar with the overall meeting or presentation structure, we don't want to just jump in the topic and then continue forever and people don't know what's happening.
I agree. I agree. Otherwise, it all just feels a bit ordinary, and a
Mm.
story can make something ordinary quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. And how can you, as a technical leader, we're very much in our technical jargon, then we talk to non-peers and or business leaders who don't necessarily have our background. How can we bridge this gap between having very technical jargon and specific industry knowledge and getting your point across without diluting your message, but still
Yes.
making sure that everyone, no matter how junior or senior, how technical or
Yes.
non-technical they are, that they still understand what we are actually talking about?
That's a really important question, Petra. So whether you're junior or senior in position or in age, whether you're technical or non-technical, you want to understand what your peers are talking about, because the workplace now is so diverse.
Mm-hmm.
We're working in a cross-generational workplace. We're working with people of various nationalities. We're working with graduates. We're working with people who are close to retirement. We're in the office. We're out of the office. We're working in a hybrid fashion. What we want is to be inclusive and for all members of our teams to understand what we are talking about. The best way to do this is to speak in plain English, to not use acronyms unless you have explained them the first time. I often, Petra, when I'm asked to speak, assume that it's someone's first day in our studio, that they are a graduate, that it's their first job out of university, that they don't fully understand what our business does, that they've never heard some of the acronyms we know and we use rather. And what that does is ensure that that person feels included in the conversation rather than excluded. There's nothing worse than sitting in a team meeting in your own workplace and not understanding what a senior person is talking about, because you immediately feel perhaps like you haven't been listening properly, or you haven't been attending the right meetings, or haven't been reading the portal or the newsletters. And no, that's not necessarily the case, is that the speaker, as we mentioned earlier, hasn't properly considered the audience. So to bridge that gap between technical and non-technical teams, assess your audience. If you're a technical leader talking to your technical team, you can speak using technical jargon. If you're a technical leader talking to a non-technical team, speak in plain English. In the first instance, help them build that confidence and that understanding of your jargon. Then you can move into that next phase by using that technical jargon. But if you start with the technical jargon in the initial stages, you will quite quickly get your audience offside.
I couldn't agree more. And I've seen it so many times in technical recruitment where extremely smart professionals just threw jargon at me and the client, and we're both like, I don't know if it's good or
Oh,
bad. Who knows? It's a different
that's
language.
right.
And somebody who can say, so you know how? Or it's a little bit like, it's like, oh yeah, I do know. And now I feel like a technical person, though I've never experienced that, but it makes me feel good.
That's
So guess what? I
good.
like this person rather than the person who made me feel stupid.
Exactly. That's a really good example, Petra. That's a really, really good example. And no one likes to be in an audience and made to feel stupid because you're not likely to listen to that person again because no one would consciously go into an environment where they're made to feel uninformed.
Absolutely. Now that has been great. I want to ask a couple more questions when we get into
Yes.
nitty and gritty, especially like presenting is horrible enough for most of us and nerve-wracking, but throw in a crisis or negative comments maybe
Yes.
also on social media, because in the end it's a conversation just in a different platform, a different communication style, but it's still you are communicating with the world.
Mm.
How or what do you work with your clients, and you have worked with high profile clients on negative press, for example, or
Yes.
accusations, or any kind of pushback that we may not even have considered?
Absolutely, Petra. I mean, when you work in public relations, when you work in the media, you are going to be exposed to some unsolicited feedback. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's to your face. In most instances, it's online and you're not able to remove it. And it can be really hurtful, it can be really offensive. I would encourage my clients to detach, to separate the person from the problem, and to focus on solving the problem. I know it's easier said than done, but these people don't know you personally. What they're trying to do is get answers to whatever the problem might be. It's really important as a business leader when there's a problem to be very honest with your stakeholders, be they internal and or external, and to be timely. I remember one of the things I learnt in my masters of communications was that if there is something that you are trying to keep a major secret, one of the best things you can do is release a public release to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and make it entirely public. And that way, there's not so much hush hush around it because everyone knows about it and it's just another day in the news. So I think being honest and, as you said earlier, transparent and delivering information in a timely and appropriate fashion is one of the best ways to manage crisis communications. If you're an individual and you're posting on LinkedIn or you have a YouTube clip and someone presents a negative comment, if you have a business and someone presents negative feedback, again, separate the person from the problem, read, try and elicit what it is they are really trying to say and address that. And more often than not, I would thank the person for their feedback. And it's not necessarily a case of kill them with kindness. It's that actually you thank them for raising that issue and you've taken it on board. Whether or not you have, you are acknowledging the comment and thanking them for it. If it's offensive, um, completely inappropriate or rude, remove it if you can or ignore it. There's no need to buy into those unnecessary spiraling downhill type conversations. It's of no value to you.
Oh, honestly, Nadia, this has been gold. All your insights, your tips, your
Thank you,
strategies,
Petra.
it was just spot on because they're so practical. They're not rocket science, but in the end, it
No.
comes down to nailing those basics to then build up on them. And you mentioned very early on, it's all about preparation. And we come back full circle. It comes down to preparation, knowing who am I talking about, or to
Yes,
what am I talking about? Why does it matter to them? And then what's the
that's
best way
right.
to deliver this message? And honestly, your way how you explain it, it's such an engaging way. I could just listen to you and look at you
Oh,
all day every day.
oh, Petra, thank you. I feel the same way. You're so enthusiastic and interested, and it's really lovely to have this opportunity to talk to you because I wanted to share with your guests some practical tips, and I'm really glad that you said that it was practical tips. And I guess, in summary, much like we've talked about, I could have sat on your podcast and talked about me, but that is not something that your guests would be interested in. Your guests want to listen and learn and take something away from your podcast. So I hope that I've been able to offer at least one or two tips to at least one or two of your guests. And I know that you have tens of thousands, which is a huge credit to you in the business that you've built. And Petra, I hope that you too, because I know you have written a book and you are an international keynote speaker. I hope that you have learned something new. You are very public online. You, I know from my own experience, have, been exposed to feedback that, hasn't always been invited, and you've managed it beautifully and gracefully as a professional would. And a lot of people do now, young or old, irrespective of what it is they're posting. And I think it is a skill to manage the way in which you communicate both in the spoken and written form.
I couldn't agree more. It's now literally the distinguishing factor between being chosen or not, because credentials, years of experience, it has become commodity. So we need to be able to stand out. And how do we do it? By communicating. Why should you choose us over somebody else? What could we bring to you that is of value to you, rather than I've got 20 years experience, I've got this. What does it even mean? Is it good? Is it
That's
bad?
right.
Who knows?
That's right, Pitch. I agree with you entirely. And I like the way you package yourself as a professional. And, I enjoy your posts and I learn so much from you. You're always about value adding to the individual and how we can present ourselves in the best light possible. So it's been a great pleasure for me to be a guest on your podcast, a real honor, in
Honestly,
fact.
your contribution was incredible. If you would leave our listeners with one last thing, what would it be?
Petra, it would be that you are enough. You are enough as you are, with the knowledge and experience that you have. And if someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, I've got this opportunity, I wondered if you would take it up. Whatever it is, no matter how big or small, you don't know where it could lead. Don't find reasons to say no. Well, I just need to finish this course. Oh, look, the timing's not great. Look, if I had a few more years of experience, have you asked that? No. Say yes, thank you. Start practicing, start preparing, get up there, perform, speak publicly, and who knows what that opportunity could bring you.
Oh, love it. As we always say, practice makes progression, not perfection, because nobody's perfect. It's always just we
I
are
love
mastering a
that.
skill. So we are progressing as we go.
I
And there's no
really
end
love
goal.
that, Petra. I haven't heard that before, actually. Practice makes progression. Yeah, that's more
That's right.
realistic.
It is realistic because communication is an art and a science to it. Like, yes, there are some facts and figures that we need to consider in terms of the structure, what you've also explained, but at the same time, it's an art in terms of how do I best deliver it with my communication styles, with my personality, with
Yes,
my own stories. And this requires practice.
it does. Like anything that you want to excel in life, if you want to do well, you have to invest time in practicing. Winging it is not good enough. You'll
No, it
never
isn't.
master the art of something if you don't practice.
And speaking of practicing, people can work with you professionally on public speaking, coaching, on communications training, and everything in between. What's the best way to connect with you, learn more about what you are up to?
Thank you, Petra. They're welcome to send me a message via LinkedIn and I will respond accordingly.
Absolutely. I love it. Nadia, again, thank you so much for being on the show, sharing so many insights, and I cannot wait for your brilliance to shine there even more.
Oh, Petra, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope that your guests learned something, and I really look forward to remaining connected to you, Petra. You're a real futurist. You're really invested in people and helping them be the best versions of themselves. And I've had a really great time recording this
Yay.
podcast with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Petra. All the best.
You too.